If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
For the first time in several decades, lawmakers are focusing their attention on a massive overhaul of the federal tax system. In many respects, the rhetoric is splitting along party lines. Republicans that control both houses of Congress, such as U.S. Senator Roy Blunt, are stressing how the bill will place more money into the pockets of millions of Americans.
Looking at the way that the tax bill has been reported, I could understand people's concern about it. But when you look at the real tax bill, both House and Senate, I think it's designed to do two things. One is to create immediately more take-home pay for hardworking families. And the second thing is to, at the other end of the scale, do whatever we can to be sure that there are better jobs in the future for those very same families.
But Democrats like Missouri Senator Claire McCaskill contend that the bill is too slanted toward the wealthy, which prompted the two-term lawmaker to vote against the measure in the Senate Finance Committee. McCaskill also expressed concern that increasing the standard deduction could have disastrous consequences for Missouri's state budget.
I'm painfully aware that the changes in this bill could blow a $1 billion hole in the Missouri budget. I'm also painfully aware what has happened to higher education in our state. I'm also painfully aware of the recent cuts for the elderly and the disabled that the governor thought was necessary in order to balance the budget. I really hope that someone can track down Governor Greitens and ask him what his answer would be as to the $1 billion hole.
As debate continues in our nation's capital, we'll go in depth on the tax plan with Republican Congressman Shimkus of Illinois. We'll also talk about other issues taking up the Collinsville natives' attention on another edition of Politically Speaking, so let's hit the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, a candid conversation with the Show Me State's biggest political newsmakers.
I'm Jason Rosenbaum.
And I'm Joe Mannies.
That's Eric Greitens, Navy SEALs running for governor, and I'm really, really glad to be on with you, Jason and Joe.
I'm going to push back on these regulators.
I'm doing this for the people.
I was encouraged along the way, not just by my family, but by a lot of teachers and professors, and knew when I was in college that I would run for office someday.
We're very excited about the prospect of having some more free market solutions.
Even though after the conversation, I still might not agree.
We want our listeners to get a real sense of what drives these people.
They're actually people with a story to tell. And welcome to Politically Speaking, the only show about Missouri politics featuring a co-host who is steeped in Illinois values. I am that host, Buffalo Grove, Illinois native Jason Rosenbaum. The interim.
What high school did you go to?
Stevenson High School.
Very good.
One of the largest high schools and one of the best high schools in America. I'm the interim political editor of St. Louis Public Radio. Joining me in studio today
is colleague Joe Mannies, and I'm from Indiana. But I've been here.
So you believe in Hoosier values?
Some.
But
I've been in Missouri longer actually than I lived in. That's what's funny.
Well, I lived in Illinois for 18 years. I'm on to year 16 of Missouri, and as we're kind of alluding to, we're taking a little bit of a break from Missouri politics because our guest for the third time today is
Congressman Shimkus from Southern Illinois.
He represents 15th District, which is a district that I think is the size of a small state, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. It's, I can't remember, 19,000 square miles, 33 counties.
Yeah. Can you give our listeners roughly?
I can. If they know where Champaign, Illinois is, University of Illinois, I don't have the campus, but I do have the county.
Okay.
And the biggest town east of there is called Danville.
Yeah.
So from Danville all the way down to Metropolis, Illinois, which is the home of Superman on the Ohio River. And then that's the north and south boundaries. And then if you take kind of like a funnel and just start stretching and with I-70 in the middle, come all the way to Collinsville, and that's my district.
Now, we were talking a little bit about this off mic, and I promise, Joe, this will be the only mention of redistricting on this show.
Okay, he's hung up on that.
But I have a theory.
For years.
I have a theory that your district was drawn on purpose to make it super Republican so that the surrounding districts would be Democratic. Illinois is one of the few states in the country where the Democrats control the redistricting process. And I think that your district was not drawn by accident. Is that fair to say?
That is correct. Exactly how you analyzed it. They made a super Republican district. They drew the 15th ended up being in essence an R15 district. They thought that this new district, the 13th, that stretches from Champaign, Urbana to Edwardsville, would be somewhat competitive for them. And that's the one Congressman Davis sits in.
He's also Republican?
He's also a Republican. The 12th district, which is the old Costello seat, which is Mike Boss' seat, is just one they let slip through their fingers. It's southern, it's rural, it's conservative, but it's been held by Democrats for a long time, and Mike Boss ably represents them.
Yes. And it's always, this is the final thought on this topic. It is very interesting to me that there is a national Democratic movement about making redistricting more fair, quote unquote, in Republican held states. They have not really called Republicans in Illinois to change the redistricting process there. I don't think it's a coincidence.
Well, it is when we talk about this national movement. I do point to Illinois. And the other thing I point to is that it still takes candidates and it still takes people.
Correct.
If we did it just based upon numbers, Congressman Davis would not be the congressman.
And Boston wouldn't be the congressman either, because that's still a Democratic-leaning district. But, sometimes
I think
it takes
Trump
candidates.
won it, so it's probably now officially a Republican district.
Wow.
Although it kind of depends. You never know what's going to be happening later in 2018. But we'll get to that
later.
That's why we love this job, right?
First and foremost, I think on a lot of our listeners' minds is what the U.S. House did just a few days ago was pass their version of this massive tax cut bill. Some say it's really tax cuts for some, not tax cuts for others. Some say it increases taxes on some groups.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of interested in your take on what happened. Kind of what was the dynamics? I mean, as they were trying to get the votes together, ended up being a somewhat comfortable margin. I guess
very
five or six more votes
sure.
than you needed, I think.
Right.
So I'm just interested in your thoughts about this.
Well, from my perspective, over the 20 years that I've run, I've always wanted what I would call a fairer, flatter, simpler tax code. I think, and I've said this for 2 decades now, and I think people believe that the tax code is too complex. They like it simple. They'd like to be able to trust the numbers, and they wish they didn't have to go to an accountant to do it. Mm-hmm. So you put that all together. That means how do you get a simpler tax code? Well, you have to take away a lot of the deductions. You got to lower the rates and take away deductions. And if you look at the rates, the only rate that didn't go down was the 39.6 on the very wealthy people in our society. The angriest calls I got were. He didn't live in my district, but he was a rich Republican from Chicago saying, I'm going to pay more. I'm going to pay more.
Well, some of it's because, the House bill does eliminate or at least tightly reduce state and local deductions, real estate tax deductions, all that. And then there's this huge furor over the increase for grad students, some universities taxing their endowments, taxing the grad student stipends. I'm just interested in what you're hearing.
There's a huge furor in communities that have large universities. If you're from the 15th District of Illinois, it's pretty quiet on those issues. Again, there's two components on the tax bill. First of all, you have the individual component. And again, to go from 7 to in essence 4 and keep 39.6, and then everything gets reduced, and then you'll have a couple deductions and file it on a postcard. It's being well received in my district. Now, the other portion of this is the corporate side, because when people are starting to debate this, they kind of conflict the two. Because this is where you hear, you're even though we see what you're doing on the individual rates, you're cutting to the corporate titans of the world, and that whole debate. In the world today, we have the highest corporate tax rate.
Although often many corporations, in fairness, don't pay that rate because of deductions.
And that's the whole purpose of having tax reform, is to fix that. because we want clarity and simplicity. We don't want, the public doesn't want, K Street lobbyists, Gucci Gulch going in, cutting these special deals for these corporations. That's not transparent. And that's true on the corporate side, and to some extent that's true on the individual side over the years. So we're simplifying it, going from 35 to 20. That makes us competitive internationally, and that's going to be good for jobs and growth.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, but the bill that the House passed, does it double the standard deduction, or
yes.
it does?
Yeah, it does.
Yes,
it
does.
Now, there are some Missouri-based political people who are very worried about that because they fear that it would cause the state budget to lose around $1 billion or so. A year. I don't know what the situation is in Illinois about whether you can deduct your federal income taxes from your state income taxes. But did you hear any concerns from Illinois-based politicians that would affect
Governor Rauner?
That would affect the budget? I know this is kind of funny because Illinois' budget situation is national news, but I know that's been a talk about in Missouri in particular.
No, the answer is no. There's really not a lot of discussion between federal elected officials and leadership in the state of Illinois. Whether it's been on health care, whether it's on the tax code, Illinois has enough problems without trying to be, micromanaging in that. And in all honesty, the federal government still, with all the stuff we're going on, we still have our budgetary issues too, right? $20 trillion in debt. That's nothing to preach, austerity to someone else.
But the tax cut bill wouldn't necessarily change that. You would still end up, they're saying right now, it would still add like $1.5 trillion to the debt?
Well, that's if you don't ascribe to the argument of dynamic scoring. See, what we did over the last Congress, we changed from static scoring to dynamic scoring. So here's an example that I try to use. We have historically cut the capital gains tax rate.
Right.
And what has that done to revenue to the federal government? It's increased revenue. So we think economic activity, we're gonna make the argument. I guess if we pass the bill and it gets signed into law and we see the economic growth, we're going to say, see, we were right. If we don't, our opponents are going to say, see, you were wrong. But that's kind of where we're headed.
Now, you mentioned that in your district, the whole higher education issue isn't that much of an issue. But are you hearing much from your colleagues, if they're hearing a lot about it? Because what the analysts are saying, it's going to increase the cost of higher education on average people by about $71 billion over 10 years. I'm just interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, as I said, I just came back from Washington University,
right.
and looking at their medical research facilities, their doctoral programs. So they have the two provisions that they're concerned about, their endowment issue. And we talked through that a little bit, and also grad students and what's accredited as income or not. And their point was our endowments are plowed back into our research, and if we don't have that, then we don't have enough dollars to match with the NIH dollars. Good lesson learned. I'll take that back to Washington. Issue on grad students is, listen, they get a stipend in essence. The other stuff are credits for their tuition. If you count that as income, they're not going to be here. All these smart grad students who are helping us do all this research are going to go elsewhere. Also a credible point. The legislative process is a living, breathing entity. The Senate Finance Committee passed their bill out on Friday night or Thursday night, and then it'll get the floor if everything goes as scheduled, when we get back, and we'll see what they add. The Senate process is different.
Right.
That's where they legislate on the floor of the Senate, where we do it in the committee for the most part.
Well, partly because you got so many more members. But yeah,
we're more of a committee-driven process where the Senate is, they're all little kings and queens, and they really have a say over each piece of legislation versus.
But I do want to go back to the debt aspect of this for a second. Now, let's say it's not $1.5 trillion. Let's say there's economic growth that comes with this, but it's $700 billion or whatever. I've been hearing from Republicans for a long time about how bad deficit spending and the debt is. And I think one of the criticisms of this bill is that rhetoric has been kind of taken aside to essentially accomplish something in the first year of the Donald Trump administration. I'd like you to address that because that's going to a core of Republican messaging for the last 5, 10, 15 years.
Right. Or what if the growth is $3 trillion?
Mm-hmm.
See, you could argue this on both sides. And so we believe that the economy has been in a malaise for at least 10 years. Take the Obama years, you take the last Bush years, 2.5% growth, where historically prior to that you've been at 5, 6, 7%. So you look at economic growth and just double it. If we can get the 5% economic growth, we'll match those numbers easily. And that's what it's all about, the ability to compete internationally and spur economic growth. And are we throwing the dice on debt and deficits? Yeah. I hope we're right. I just hope we're right.
Well, there's been talk today that there's one proposal that's being floated around which would actually get rid of the debt ceiling. Which, to be frank, there's been some on both sides who've been talking about that for decades, because the United States, frankly, is practically the only major nation in the world that has what's known as a debt ceiling, which has been around since the end of World War I. I'm just interested in because apparently there's some Republicans who are floating this around. I'm just interested in your thoughts about that.
Well, we're in St. Louis and used to be represented by the minority leader and Dick Gephardt. And there was the Gephardt rule, which for a period of time eliminated this. Every time you passed a budget, that you didn't have to vote on raising the debt ceiling or the debt limit. Now, conservatives, even now, yes, there are some that are saying this is kind of a fraudulent argument because these are things you've already paid for.
Right.
So
the debt
are we going to
ceiling
default on obligations of folks? And the answer is, I hope not. We have to be good to our word. But conservatives like to have this because we still feel that debt is important. And this is the only thing that forces us to at least have that debate and go on record and say, having this debate right here is 20 trillion debt too much?
Right. Well, do you think that Congress will ultimately send a tax overhaul bill to the president? I think that there's some doubt because the margin in the Senate is so small, and there's all these, I'm using this tongue-in-cheek, rogue Republicans out there like, Flake and the Corker, McCain,
Collins, Murkowski. It depends on what's in it. Obviously you're from the House perspective. The House didn't deal with the Affordable Care Act. They threw that in to get rid of the mandate, which some say will increase rates and reduce the number of people who get it. Without getting into that debate, do you the House intentionally decided to keep the health care part out of the tax cut bill. Do you think, from what you're hearing, do you think that that's going to stick in the Senate? I've noticed the House, that the White House is now backing off saying, we don't really care if it's in there or not. And last week it was different.
Yeah. So with all these factors, what do you think ends up happening?
The answer is I have no idea.
Well, yeah.
No, but I do believe it's safe to say that we could have raised that in our bill. We did not.
Right.
Mark Walker, who's the head of the RSC, tried to get us to include the individual mandate, push that away. And I think it was because we had issues with my colleagues from high tax states, the SALT states, that adding that would just have made it even more difficult to keep the ones that we had negotiated with. I think on the Senate, it might bring the conservatives to bear and bring them more easily to this tax reform debate. It scores anywhere between $338 and $240 billion. So as far as what else you can do and modify the tax code to maybe bring the universities back in happy status with the grad students or with the endowments. So
does the Senate bill doesn't deal with the grad students, Mike,
it does
correct?
not.
Okay, at least not right now.
At least right now.
I saw on Twitter that one person gave a lot of credit to Steve Scalise for making sure that the caucus for the Republicans largely voted for this bill. I think there were only 13 Republicans that didn't vote for the bill.
And they're all from the states going to be affected by the elimination of the property and sales tax.
So I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but it does seem like on this particular issue, especially when what happened with the healthcare issue, that your caucus was a lot more in line and on the same page than possibly expected. Do you give a lot of credit to someone like Representative Scalise, or do you think it's just the idea too?
Well, I mean, what Steve's been able to do in recovery and getting back to work is amazing, and his confidence and his just drive and energy is a good sign. But I would say that tax reform, tax simplification, lower rates is baked into Republicans' DNA.
Yeah.
So that is intrinsically who we are. So you have to your comfort zone is tax reform, lower rates, more money for the individual, not the opposite.
Right.
Complexity is not baked into Republican DNA because that really is the state using the tax code to do what? To social engineer, to say we want this, we don't want that. And most of us have historically been opposed to that. We want a fairer, flatter, simpler tax code and let the markets and competition sort the goods and services and that, not government dictates and policies.
Now, I know Trump had visited, I think, the House at least once before the vote. Did the president have much of an influence, or?
Yeah, so he came to the Republican conference around 11:30. Mm-hmm. The vote was already a foregone conclusion. I think it was planned to be a rah-rah, get out there and vote, but it was already done. So he mostly told stories about his trip to Asia. So, it was more of a kind of a party before the vote was even conducted.
Well, that's a good segue to my next question. What have you thought of Trump as president so far? Because, you're in a state now that Trump won by 19 points. We're recording this in Missouri, by the way.
In Missouri, but not in Illinois.
In Illinois, Trump was not as popular. I believe it was 54-40 or something. It was like a 14-point win for Hillary.
I think he won 2 counties, maybe 3, and lost 99.
Yeah.
But that's where Illinois is different than Missouri. Missouri, you have 2 metropolitan areas on both ends and mid-state, and we have really Chicago and everybody else.
Yes.
But as a member of Congress, especially after dealing with Barack Obama for 8 years, what have you noticed as far as differences? What has been some strengths? What have been some weaknesses?
I mean, as far as from your perspective, being a House member,
I'm really curious about this.
So it's easy to say that Trump is an unconventional president.
Well, everybody says that.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, and that I define him as a disruptive technology, like an Uber or the iPhone, thrown into the federal government to disrupt the way we normally operate. He's shaken up the agencies. He's put in people. I think the difference in other Republicans who've been president, they haven't been able to really shake up these agencies. They usually get consumed by them. But I think that the Trump leaders who've gone to these agencies have really shaken things up, which is exactly what he would like. And listen, I think the Trump presidency is a result of 8 years of Barack Obama. I think, especially in Illinois, I think people were tired of centralized government dictating every aspect of our lives, or at least that's what they felt, and then being lectured about why we weren't getting on board. So it was like, burn the place down, let's start anew, and in that aspect, he's fulfilling the expectations of my constituents. Now, I think a lot of my constituents wish that he was a little more presidential in his presentation and his to the public. But if I had a dime for everyone who said get him off Twitter, I'd could retire.
Well,
I can't do it.
We're recording this on what day is it today, Joe?
November 20th.
November 20th. He tweeted this morning, Marshawn Lynch of the NFL's Oakland Raiders stands for the Mexican anthem and sits down to booze for our national anthem. Great disrespect. Next time, NFL should suspend him for remainder of season. Attendance and ratings way down. Now, I know this is not an NFL show, but the idea that we're going to suspend a player for longer than somebody who does a helmet-to-helmet hit or domestic violence seems just bonkers to me. And I'm not really sure why the president is getting into this beyond just rallying his base. But is that something that you mean by presidentialness, essentially?
But there may be some people. Listen, I have a lot of relatives who love that stuff.
But yeah, continue on your point, I guess.
Well, I would just say that many people on both sides, those who support him, those who don't support him, wish that he wouldn't tweet as much.
Yeah, I mean, but now from the devil's advocate, of course, as reporters, I think reporters love to see what he's
I bet you love it.
I mean, it's terrible. You know.
Well, but look what I'm seeing too is really now stories are being written based upon how people tweet now. Yeah. I mean, instead of doing a press release, you do a tweet, and people then take that tweet and they'll reference it in a story.
Now, as a member of Congress, I mean, kind of how do you deal with this whole social media frenzy? I mean, which wasn't around really, I mean, to this length, even 10 years ago.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, and so kind of how has this affected how you handle your office, how you campaign? I mean, just kind of what's been your...
It's a media space that you have to have a presence in. And so I have people that they will do most of my social media. I may do one or two things. You can kind of tell mine because there's misspellings and.
Well, I think every morning there's a Bible verse every morning. I'm assuming that you do that on your staff.
That is mine.
And it's actually like almost like a clock. I wake up, I scroll, and I'm like, oh, Representative Shimkus Bible verse. And I think people have actually noticed that because I don't think every member of Congress does something like that. But I think that it's a way of kind of showing things that you care about beyond the realm of politics and beyond just, look at what the Republicans did, go Republicans, so to speak.
Yeah, and I don't editorialize. I just put the verse down. The whole thing of the Twitter when it started was people would follow you.
Yeah.
So if the first thing I do is a morning devotion, that's kind of why, which is what I do, is that's why I put that on there. But I found out some interesting things too. It's kind of like Facebook. I found out that on Facebook, people who, they put the thumbs up, they say they like you, to follow you, they really don't like you. You understand? Because they're not saying anything nice about you. So they say, I'm going to follow you. I'm going to like you. You remember say like me on Facebook? You guys probably say that.
Yeah.
Like me on Facebook.
Although I keep my Facebook mainly for personal use. Yeah. So I had some officials, even members of Congress early on, but I've gradually unfriended them. Nothing personal, but it's for my relatives.
I have two. I have a personal one to follow my family because that's where you find out when you haven't been invited to a family outing, right?
Baby pictures, all that stuff.
Yeah. But then I also have a congressional Facebook page. But I think it's funny because people say, "Yeah, I'm gotta like you to get on." Well, they really don't like you because you can tell based upon their comments that there's no liking in there.
Well, veering out of the realm of whether Marshawn Lynch should stand or sit, has it been easier as a Republican congressman to have Trump in office because there's a clear path to get some legislation passed? I know we were talking beforehand that health care was obviously not successful. I don't know if this tax overhaul bill is going to be successful, but maybe for some of the things, for example, that you do on the Energy and Commerce Committee, it seems like there's a better path than, say, when Obama was president.
Well, that's true, except for you all followed my in the last Congress, under the last administration, we passed TSCA reform, which is the chemical safety bill that the president signed. So I think good legislation, bipartisan, that moves through the process, the president shouldn't be a factor totally. They are a factor. The fact that we got Republican House, Republican Senate, we're moving legislation, would hope that would help the president eventually sign the bill. But again, President Trump is unconventional. So he was more a populist than a partisan. And, I mean, he supported Republicans and Democrats. So just because it's a Republican initiative doesn't mean that he's going to support it. I think part of the issues were going back to tax reform real quick. You know, part of the Republican DNA is everyone should get a tax cut, because even the job creators. But the president said, no, we're not going to give tax cuts to the wealthy. Boom, 39.6, not going to change. That rate's going to stay there for the wealthy, primarily because President played the populist card, and he's going to end up signing the bill. He had leverage, and that's why that's in there.
It's still being castigated as a sop to the wealthy.
Well, because of the elimination of the state tax. And
well,
some of the
because
other
we're Republicans. Come on.
Okay,
you know, of course we're going to give money to the wealthy.
I know,
I'm
being facetious. But,
I mean, I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I'm just saying
I know.
It's not like the wealthy are coming off.
But
I think that's part of the argument. I mean, I think people will say that, too. That's true.
And I was just going to say, at the beginning of the show, it's kind of on party lines. Like, the Republicans are emphasizing that this is going to put more money in the pockets of a lot of people. Democrats are saying it's a stop to the wealthy, but they said that about the Bush tax cuts too. And they probably have said that about every time taxes are cut.
And actually, a couple years after the Bush tax cuts, they had to do some tax changes because it ended up, part of it's because 9/11 happened in the middle of that, right after the tax cuts. But it got complicated.
Even in our bill, it's a budget is a 10-year window, so some of them are going to be permanent. And
right.
You hear some of them go for 5 years, and permanency kicks in after 5. I think on the what we would call the death tax, you know, I think there's a phase in for the first 5 years, and it gets permanent from 5 to 10. And it's all scoring and trying to hit the 1.5 trillion. Why is 1.5 trillion magical? Because that's the budget reconciliation numbers that the Senate passed. Those are the numbers we
Otherwise,
have to hit.
you would need 60 votes.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, the whole reconciliation process would have gone away.
Now, you mentioned there's a couple, talking about issues, then you're not quite sure where the president stands. You've been talking about a couple issues that you've been heavily involved with, brownfields and drinking water.
Safe Drinking Water Act. Well, brownfields redevelopments, bipartisan bill, passed the full committee. We're going to get it on the floor, I think, next week. And that's so everybody knows, even in major areas like metropolitan St. Louis or even rural America, there are buildings that are unoccupied, falling down because people don't want to take the risk of claiming title because they don't know what's there and they may have to clean it up to some standard that they're not going to use it. So brownfields redevelopment really, I think, returns $10 for every one. It works with the local communities, and then you provide the avenue by which those facilities can be redeveloped. You know what one of the most famous brownfield redevelopments is?
No, go ahead.
The new baseball stadium in Houston, where the Astros won the World Series. That's a brownfield redevelopment site. Safe drinking water really stems from not reauthorizing that bill in many, many years, and you had Flint, and you had other issues, and this expands the ability to bring more money to help leverage what local communities. That's the local community's responsibility to provide drinking water to their community, but the infrastructure costs are high, and so that bill, we have a scoring problem. It's a little bit more than our budgeteers will want to accept. So we're working, and my hope is that we roll that into a disaster bill, because when you talk about Puerto Rico and their drinking water issues, it's kind of perfect to segue in there.
Yeah, because I know there's been a lot of furor about Flint and kind of what happened there. And without getting people the details, the bottom line was that they changed the water supply system so that it came from a polluted source, in effect, is what happened. And now they've had to redo the system.
Human error.
Right.
And we'll see if people are held personal responsibility for it. Wasn't the rules, it wasn't the regulations, It was a decision made by a human that caused that problem.
Yeah, so would your bill deal with that? I know many see that particular case as more of a state issue because it was a state official who made that decision. Would your bill address that in some way?
Well, all I know is Debbie Dingell, who's from Michigan, serves on the committee, and she voted for it. So it was, we didn't want to get drugged down the too politicized path, but what we did is we raised the authorization up to the spending levels. We brought some competition into materials and services, working with the local communities, and we got bipartisan buy-in.
So you're talking about maybe adding what more you might see it becoming part of a broader disaster
I am
bill?
either that, or if we move early next year into a infrastructure bill.
Okay.
And so brownfields could go in infrastructure. Even though we passed something through the House, doesn't mean it's going to get through the Senate anytime soon. My job is to get these bills through the House so that if and when there may be a major infrastructure bill, you could lop in safe drinking water, you could put in brownfields, you can put in nuclear waste issues that I deal with, and then those are all could be quote unquote infrastructure.
Does Governor Rauner show up in Washington much?
No.
Because I was just kind of wondering. Now, okay, I'm going to show my age here, but back in the day when I was in the Post-Dispatch Washington Bureau in the early '80s, Jim Thompson was the governor of Illinois, Republican at that time, and he was like a fixture. I mean, it was probably, I would say at least once every 2 months, if not more often. And they would always let you know. They'd always have reporters come, and we'd hang around, and he would just talk about anything. And Kip Bond was the governor of Missouri, and he did that too, maybe a little bit of a lesser extent, but he was there a lot. So I'm just curious. I mean, do you see, does that have an effect when the state governors show up or don't, or is it just kind of window dressing?
Well, I think it's important. I mean, Illinois is really, even though we are challenged, it's still a big state. And I would think that if the governor wanted to leverage recovery of the state with what we can do in a infrastructure, highway infrastructure bill, safe drinking water, brownfields, that he would weigh in and give some advice and counsel and speak for the state. Governor Rauner has decided that his focus is only on things that he feels are Illinois issues, and is fighting the battle to help Illinois become a competitive state again.
Mm-hmm. Do you support his reelection?
What was that question?
I'll repeat it. Do you support his reelection bid? Because I know that there's already one state rep who's primarying him primarily because he signed a bill that allows Medicaid to pay for abortions. And am I getting that correctly, Joe?
Yes.
So I know a lot of people who are opposed to abortion rights are incensed with the governor now for signing that bill.
The governor knows that I'm not happy with a couple positions that he's taken, and as he gets through the process, and when he gets to the general election, if it's between him and a Democrat, then I'll be supporting the governor.
But you didn't answer my question, though. Are you going to support him in the Republican
I did
primary?
not answer your question, and I'm probably not going to answer your question.
Because you're going to stay out of it.
Yeah, I'm going to stay out of it, right.
I mean, to be honest, okay, he has $1 jillion at his disposal.
That's correct.
And I think a Republican primary opponent is going to be at a major disadvantage.
That's correct.
But as I mentioned before, there is some, for various reasons, but the reason I just mentioned dealing with abortion, there is some not happiness among the conservative base in Illinois.
Well, I think a lot of us who campaigned, I campaigned with the governor quite a bit, and I think it was not stated, we didn't sign any oaths, but I think it was implied that if his focus was on fixing the fiscal mess and job creation aspects of Illinois, we're all on board. We thought that he would stay out of some of the socially divisive issues. He did not. It's not just HB 40, it's also sanctuary state status and some other issues that have caused people in Southern Illinois. Now, you define Southern Illinois by anything south of where you're standing. So,
or once you get to Kankakee or something like that. But continue.
Yeah, so now looking ahead a little bit, because we're almost 2018.
Amazing.
This is end of November, and you're running for re-election.
I am. We're circulating petitions right now. The first day for filing is November 27th, and the last day for filing, I think, is December 4th.
Yeah, because Illinois is a little faster. Because in Missouri, filing doesn't start until the end of February.
Right.
So as you're looking at this, getting your petitions together, looking at the landscape, anything in particular that you're going to feel like you have to either emphasize or not, or change your focus or not, going into 2018? I mean, compared to 2016.
In all honesty, in my congressional district, the biggest comment I get is you better support Trump. So there is and so there obviously there's people that follow our votes all the time, and I think Last time I checked, I was at 97.6.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you go, oh, no, how did we not get to 100? And the 100 it's kind of funny to mention this. It's on Russian sanctions, which the president didn't want us to pass, which he ended up signing. So I think I'm at 100%. Now, I don't know. I'm sure the tax vote's now part of that calculation, and I don't know what the side is that follows us. But my folks want me to continue to support the president.
Now, are there particular issues? I know, the wall. I know they're doing they have built some test types and things like that. I mean, the people in your district who really want to make sure you support Trump, are there particular issues that are high on their agenda?
Well, I think it was repeal and replace. I think it's tax reform. I think it's obviously immigration, the wall. I think it's an infrastructure plan, hopefully to come, welfare reform, those type of issues.
So how much do you think the governor's race is going to loom large? I'm not gonna pretend like your district is going to be competitive in the general election, because it's not. If you win your primary, you're probably going to win another term. But for people like Rodney Davis and Mike Bost, I feel the governor's race is going to loom large, because if Rauner,
as far as trickle-down effect.
If Rauner tanks, and let's say J.B. Pritzker, who is worth $700 trillion or something
right.
like that, wins, and he wins by a lot, that could hurt like Bost and Davis's reelection hopes. What's kind of your take on that?
Well, I just look at the field. If the field turns out to be Pritzker and Rauner, what do you have? You have
two billionaires running against each other,
right.
which is funny in a state that doesn't have any money. I find that incredibly ironic, by the way.
Well,
but let's take that.
You're taking the words right out of my mouth. I mean, where is the separation? Where's the difference?
It's because Illinois, it does fascinate me on this.
Well, here's a difference.
So
You asked for a difference. I think that Pritzker would sign a Democratic map in 2021. I think Rauner will veto it when it comes to redistricting.
We're talking about redistricting, circling back to Jason.
But
I thought you were going to talk about that anymore.
I know. Well, that's one that you asked the question, and I think I answered
No, I think
that.
the other answer is Michael Madigan.
Okay.
Still looms large in Illinois.
Is he? Okay. I've asked this on Twitter.
Now, just so our listeners know,
yes.
Madigan is the most powerful Democrat in the state.
Yes, and
maybe the most powerful Speaker of the House in the history of this country.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Having been Speaker almost 37 years.
Longer than I've been born. Longer than I've been alive, except for a 2-year period where Republican was Speaker. I have noticed that Governor Rauner has castigated him, made him a villain, put him in ads unfavorably. Yet, and gerrymandering might be one of the reasons. The Democrats still hold pretty large majorities in the House. I'm just wondering how successful of a strategy it is to vilify somebody that I'm not really sure is hugely unpopular in Illinois.
I would check polling numbers.
Is he? I don't know.
I think the disappointing thing is what's happened is the race to the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And it started day one when the governor got elected, having this fight with Mike Madigan, and I can assure you that both their numbers are very bad.
Oh, yeah. So you're not running for governor, though. You'll just be watching that as an outside observer. We'll leave it at that, but we want to thank you again for coming and talking about a multitude of issues. For all of our stories, stlpublicradio.org. Follow me on Twitter at @JRosenbaum. Follow Joe on Twitter at
J Mannies. That's JMANNIES. And I was thrilled to have the congressman here.
I was thrilled, too, and I would also be thrilled to know what your Twitter account is.
It's Shimkus.gov, I think.
I think it's at Rep. Shimkus.
Oh, that's right.
You have to know because
Shimkus.gov is my house one.
Yes. So just follow any of those ways to follow the congressman on the World Wide Web. And also like him. And not only just like him, but also you should like him. He's a nice guy.
You should like me.
He's a nice guy for coming on our show. But we'll be back next time. Until then, so long.
The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
in Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights. At Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer, St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on The Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.